it comes down to.
He gets 2 minutes to say
If
goodbye.
Batman gets jumped in an alleyway by an eternal, he loses 10 out of 10 times.
His parents lost.
Listen.
Always prepared, bro.
Hold on.
You ever heard of Brother Eye?
So in the Marvel universe, I'm a big fan of Spider-Man and Captain America, but my favorite is Iron Man. If you pit Iron Man and Batman up against each other, they are basically the same thing. But I think Iron Man would still win because Iron Man is intellectually far smarter than Batman is.
What makes you say that?
Because he's a freaking super genius. And even though Batman is incredibly smart and he is a detective, we're never told in the Batman comics that he has the same IQ level of someone like Iron Man. Iron Man is literally a savant super genius, and Bruce Wayne is never described that way. Bruce Wayne is intelligent, yes. He's a detective, yes. Really witch, but so is Tony Stark. But Tony Stark is a savant genius.
I think you can also make the argument that Iron Man would learn as he is fighting, but Batman's not learning as soon as he leaves his lab because of Iron Man's AI. I think he would keep learning as the fight is going on. And that would take
That's actually another good point.
Okay, so DC has an equivalent to like the Eternals. The Eternals are actually like a ripoff of DC's New Gods, and Batman killed one of the New Gods in comics.
Well, Batman on several occasions has killed or defeated Superman. But
Superman's weak. He gets a kryptonite light work.
exactly. I mean, all you got to do is find what hurts that person. Again, I love Batman, but over the years, the more I read comics, I'm just become convinced that Iron Man would just, I'm sorry, he would just win.
I think the superhero is Yahweh.
God.
You know, Bible man made it to it?
Dude, I had seen Bible Man on a hot.
Listen, Yahweh is in the Marvel universe, and so
He's
is
the one above all.
Yahweh, as we know God, is in the Marvel universe, and as is Jesus, and as is the Holy Spirit. I won't necessarily tell you which comic book it's located in because I can't recommend it because it's not in the main Marvel series. It's in the series that features Howard the Duck. Mhm. They're not in the same mature level as the main Marvel comic line. All right. Let's see here. So we're at the point right now where Europe is basically going to go crazy. I mean, it's gone crazy a couple times at this point, but trying to get my notes open here. That's the right one. You gonna show me what I need you to show me? Of course, you're gonna open in the wrong app. You can turn it on so you guys can see it. Okay. Now, Today, we're going to talk about the 30 Years' War. And the 30 Years' War is going to last. God dang it. Oh, yeah, it is. I guess. Yeah. Okay. The 30 Years' War lasts from 1618 to 1648. So we are now in the 17th century. Okay. The Protestant Reformation has spread throughout all of Europe and basically the known world at this point. Now, the 30 Years' War takes place primarily in what historians will call the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so if you look at this map on the screen, which you can't see yet, okay, you can see that it's basically a lot of what we think as Germany and some of the German-speaking countries, okay, between Poland, Hungary, and France and Switzerland. It's a large kind of swath of the European continent here, okay? So this is when it is and where it is, okay? 1648 to 1618 to 1648. It's 30 years. It's literally in the name. Now, as far as what happened, the Protestant Reformation happened, okay? There are alliances being drawn by monarchies and countries based on the concept of the Protestant Reformation. One of the byproducts of the Protestant Reformation, as I'll explain more and more, and we'll hit on this the rest of the semester, is this idea of individualism. This idea of individualism, especially for the medieval church. I hope you guys have put this in your head by this point, that you've formed this understanding that the early church is one set, okay? The medieval church is a different set, and then the modern church is a completely different set, okay? So in the early church, they kind of had a different understanding of how things worked than the medieval era. In the early church, there is individualism, but the idea of community is just as important, if not more important. In the medieval era, it went the opposite direction. In the medieval era, individualism was kind of a minority opinion. The idea of community was more important than individualism. So think of that pendulum swinging back and forth, all right? I like to think that the early church had at least a balanced view, if not a little bit more on the community side. Okay, the medieval church swung too far. And then you're going to have the modern church, and the modern church swung, in some people's opinion, myself included, the modern church swung too far trying to overcorrect because of the medieval Roman Catholic theology.
So the medieval was too much on community?
Say that again?
The medieval church was too much on community?
Yes.
And when now we're too much on individual?
Yes.
By too much on community, the medieval church like discouraged people to think for themselves, right? And they were just like, whatever the church said to it.
Pretty much. That's kind of the end result of everything we've been talking about at this point. Now, remember, there's a reason why they do this. They're doing this, for those of us that were in Church History 1, they're doing this to protect the faith, to protect the church. Because in the first couple of centuries, you had heresies such as Gnosticism that are running rampant. And it was the job of the bishops to protect the church from heresies. And they had to do this. Okay? That's ultimately where the canon came from. The Bible was already floating around. Yes, I understand that. But the need to collect the books of the New Testament into an authoritative canon came from the emergence of heresies, which came from individualism. Too much emphasis on individualism. Okay. So the medieval church kind of responds to that, and they swing too far. The Protestant church, as it swings, as it emerges as the modern era, one of the consequences of the Protestant Reformation is an overemphasis on individualism, which we feel today. And I think, there are a lot of scholars that agree with me on this. I think the church is going through another revival right now that's correcting itself, or trying to correct itself. And American Protestant evangelicalism does not like this. Okay, we'll talk more about that as we get later on into the semester. All right. Part of what's going to happen after as the Protestant Reformation is in full swing. Remember, the Augsburg Confession, Germany, or what we call Germany today, but what was called the Holy Roman Empire then, is going to splinter more or less because of Lutheranism and the Protestant Reformation. And the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, who's the emperor for the most part during Luther's reign of the Protestant Reformation, he's got to figure out a way to keep it all united. Otherwise, he's going to lose control. And he doesn't, and he eventually does lose control. And so one of the ways that they do this is by making it illegal to be anything other than Roman Catholic. But that's not going to work very well. So in 1555, you have what's called the Peace of Augsburg. Augsburg is the same city where we have the Lutheran Confession, what's known as the Augsburg Confession. Okay. So is it Lutheranism or is it Roman Catholicism? Okay. Lutheranism or Roman Catholicism?
All right. Let's just answer.
The phrase that you see is Latin that says whose realm, their religion. So basically, in the Holy Roman Empire, a lot of these are they're overseen by German princes, right? So if you lived in a province and the prince was okay with Lutheranism, you could be Lutheran. If you lived in a German province where the prince was Roman Catholic, you basically had to be Roman Catholic. And so what they would do is they would start moving back and forth, especially the Lutherans, or if they didn't want to, they would do it in secret and be breaking the law. But that was what was called Peace of Augsburg. It was their attempt, it was the Holy Roman Empire's attempt at some form of religious toleration. Doesn't really work all that well, but it was their attempt. Lutheranism or Roman Catholicism. But notice, it does not include Calvin. Nothing like that. No Calvinism, no Zwinglianism, nothing like that. This is just in the Holy Roman Empire, all the German-speaking countries, you could be Lutheran or Roman Catholic. That's it. So that's what I'm saying. It's not really religious toleration. Now, basically what's going to happen is people are going to kind of be floating back and forth, the Protestants versus the Roman Catholics, and it's going to lead to a lot of heightened issues. Religious turns political and military. Okay. And let me put it this way. What's going on right now with Russia and Ukraine is political, but it's also religious. If you guys don't know anything about your history, where we are now, European religious history anyways, Russia remember when we talked about there were 5 patriarchies originally, right? 5 bishops and the 5 regions. Especially when you think of the Eastern churches, Russia today is considered, it has its own cultural church, right? The Russian Orthodox Church. You have the Greek Orthodox Church, the Antiochian Orthodox Church, so on and so forth. Okay. And in the 800s, early 900s, Kiev, which is the Ukrainian pronunciation, Kiev is the Russian pronunciation. Kiev is basically, it's the ancient what they call Rus, the Russians. Originally, the capital was in Kiev. And the monarch or the ruler of Kiev is going to convert to Orthodoxy. He's going to convert to what we would think of as the Orthodox religion, the Orthodox Church. And Kiev becomes the capital. It's where the cathedral is set. That's where the bishop of that part of the Orthodox Church stays. Eventually, the capital is going to move for this area. The influence, the power of influence is going to move from Kiev to where we know Russia is today, and Moscow. Okay. So you have the Russian church, and then you have the Ukrainian church. A few years ago, before Russia, you guys remember how Russia went and invaded and took over, tried to take over parts, and did take over parts of like Georgia and things like that. And they annexed Crimea. They actually took over Crimea. They tried to take over Georgia, but they took over Crimea. You guys remember that? You may have been a little younger to care, but it happened. Same thing that's happening now. But what's going on here is the Ukrainian church, a few years ago, right before all that happened, or around the same time that happened, the Orthodox Church tried to call a general council, which they have not done since 1054, when the Eastern Church is split from the Western churches. And they were all going to do it except Russia. Russia wouldn't do it because the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, they were trying to fight for their independence. Ukraine got their, I'm sorry, Ukraine as a country had been independent since since 1992, 91, when the USSR fell, when the Soviet Union collapsed. But the Ukrainian church has tried to gain its independence from the powerful influence of the Russian Orthodox Church ever since then. And so when all the Orthodox churches wanted to have a big general council, which they haven't done since 1054, Russia said, we're not going to do it. And you can't have the council if you don't have them all show up in the Orthodox Church, basically. And the kind of the head, what they call him the ecumenical patriarch, and his name is Bartholomew in Greece. He's trying to get all the different patriarchs, archbishops of the Orthodox Church, to come together. And everybody says yes, except for Russia. And Russia won't do it because the Ukrainian church has basically split off from the Russian church, and they have determined that they are their own autonomous, or I can't say the word, autocephalous, basically what we think of as autonomous. They're part of it, but they kind of make their own decision. Okay. So Russia always wanted to have control culturally and religiously within the church. What Russia is doing right now is basically trying to take back over the Ukrainian church. The Russian Orthodox Church is in a very deep, close relationship with Moscow, with the Kremlin, with Putin. Okay. And so if you've been paying attention the last few days, the Russian Orthodox Church completely backed Putin.
Really?
The patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church said that it was a good and valid, holy thing to invade Ukraine. Every other part of the church, the Orthodox Church, but then Church Universal, condemned it. And we all know, especially with historical theologians, we understand that this is a political move, but it's a move to try to take back over the Ukrainian church. Okay. So that's a modern example of what is breaking out in the 30 Years' War. Now, Protestants versus Roman Catholics, Ukrainian Church versus the Russian, Ukrainian Orthodox Church versus the Russian Orthodox Church. And if you guys don't know this, Protestants make up a very, 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 very small population of Ukraine today. Almost 70%, it's like 67, 68% of Ukraine is Ukrainian Orthodox. It's a large population. So in the 30 Years' War, you had 4 phases. It's basically going to be the same thing. They're trying to fight and say, well, no, we want to be Roman Catholic. No, we want to be Protestant. Okay. Who's going to win the battle? So you had the Bohemian Phase. You had the Danish Phase. I hope you're all writing this down because this is very important.
The 30-year war.
When was the war?
1618.
1618 to 1648. Good job. The first 2 phases, the Bohemian and the Danish, were local and religious, which is why I'm drawing the parallel to Russia and Ukraine. Phase 3 and 4 were the Swedish Phase and the French Phase. This is continental and political. I'm not saying that the whole Russian invasion of Ukraine is only because they're trying to take back over the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but that's a good part of this.
Did you say that Russia?
No, I said the rest of the church condemns the Russian invasion of Ukraine. All the Orthodox Church, everybody else in the Orthodox Church, the Greek, everybody else, they have the Antiochian, they've all condemned Putin invading Ukraine. The only one who did not is the Russian Orthodox Patriarch. He supported it.
So what is this?
It's the whole idea of church and state. The Russian Orthodox Church has a very close relationship with Putin, with the Russian government.
What does everyone else say about the church that's supported? Or I guess that's supported.
I mean, they're in a disagreement. They don't want Russia to invade Ukraine because when it comes to Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kyiv, the capital of Kyiv, was planted a lot earlier than Moscow was. There's a famous, it's floating around on the internet right now. This is an image that was put out by Ukrainian political leaders and religious leaders. You guys see that? Kyiv had an established church as early as 996, while Moscow was still a forest. All the way up to 1108, St. Michael's Golden Domed Monastery, which
The U.S. embassy tweeted that.
they retweeted it, yes, because the Ukrainian political government and the Ukrainian religious leader put it out there first, and then the rest of the world was like, yeah, Ukraine. Ukraine. Remember, it was Ukraine first before Moscow. There was a Ukrainian church before there was a Russian Moscow church. Okay. So that's why. All right, moving back to this. So Bohemian is the first phase, Danish is the second. Both are religious and local. Think Russia versus Ukraine. Swedish phase and the French phase are continental and political. This is what's going to happen if Putin doesn't calm down and the rest of the world gets involved. No, they're not going to start a war. They can't because Russia is a nuclear country like we are. So if an actual war breaks out with all the allies, it would not be good.
What?
I heard what you said, and that's a big fat no.
What is?
I know he's coming back, but not because of this. That's dispensationalism, and it's based on a lot of bad theology. So, moving on. The Bohemian phase takes place in the kingdom of Bohemia. The reason why I'm shaking my head is because a lot of dispensationalists will say that Russia is one of the prophesied countries. You know, if you believe and agree with dispensationalism and the whole Left Behind series and all that kind of stuff, you know, Gog and Magog go to war, and people say, "Oh, that's Russia." No, it's not. Russia is not in the Bible. America is not in the Bible. Okay, so it's bad theology to say otherwise. Bohemian, you're reading something into the scriptures that was never there and it was never intended to be there. So, Bohemian phase is from the kingdom of Bohemia, obviously. So, what do you do when you have Roman Catholic ruler and a Protestant majority? Now, he's saying that because individualism, right? I know. Yeah. The idea is majority rules, right? The people have a vote. The people are the ones that make this decision. But you guys are thinking with American modern individualistic philosophies, which is not how the medieval era worked, and it's not how the early modern era worked. I mean, it turns that way very fast, but you have to understand, for well over 1,000 years, the church was always used to back up the monarchs. The monarchs they all said that they had the divine right to rule because God put them in power. What scripture did they quote to support themselves? Those of you in Christ culture in the church. Okay. And there's the idea, if you go back far enough, I don't know if you guys know this, but almost all of the European monarchies all stemmed originally, kind of, sort of, from one large extended family. For example, when we get to World War I, the King of England, King George, the King of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, and the King of Russia, Tsar Nicholas, were all cousins. If you know anything about European history, you became a monarch because you were related. The majority of the monarchies and the kingdoms of the world came from one family. Granted, one large extended family, but one family, right? And they claimed that they had the divine right to do this because they were chosen by God. Some of them would go all the way back, making the claims that they had the right to do this because they were related to people like King David. Not all of them, but some of them did. Okay. So, the Habsburgs are a family within this region of the world, within the Kingdom of Bohemia, who want to grant Protestants toleration through what's called a letter of majesty. Remember, I told you the Habsburgs become an important ruling dynasty within the Holy Roman Empire. So, Bohemia, to keep itself from fracturing, said, all right, well, we have a Roman Catholic king, monarch, but the majority of the Bohemians are Protestants. We'll just pass a law basically saying, or the king will pass a decree establishing religious toleration. so that there is not an overthrow of the government. However, Ferdinand II revoked this.
Did that say letter of majesty?
Think of it as a presidential order, executive order. So his predecessor establishes the letter of majesty, granting religious toleration to the Bohemians. Ferdinand II revokes it. Ferdinand II does this because he was educated by Jesuit priests. What did I tell you about Jesuit priests?
They declare complete like submission to Catholic government. Or
Yeah, they're like
Church.
hardcore anti-Protestant.
Hardcore anti-Protestants. They are a direct byproduct of the Catholic Reformation, Counter-Reformation. They have pledged ultimate allegiance to the Pope.
Yeah, they were the group.
Remember,
They were like the church. If I see something that's black, the church says white, then it's white.
basically. If the church tells me that the white I see is black, it's actually closer to the quote, then it's black. If I look outside and I see a blue sky, but the church tells me it's green or red, it's green or red, according to the Jesuits. And Ferdinand II is educated by Jesuit priests. So he's going to come out with that kind of very militant, no, we're Roman Catholic personality. So think of it this way. There are two teams. Do you like sports? I think this is going to follow something of a baseball analogy. I guess you could make this a football analogy, but number one, the first team is the Evangelical Union, established in 1608 by the Protestants. Number two, the Catholic League, established by the Catholics in 1609. The Protestants were the Protestants in, everybody write this down, Bohemia, Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, Denmark, Switzerland, and eventually the French. They didn't start out that way. They were Roman Catholics, but eventually the French.
What are they for?
Huh?
What are these for?
It's on the screen.
They're for the Catholic League.
No, they're for the Protestants.
That's what it's for.
Evangelical Union. The Protestants are Bohemia, Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, Denmark, Switzerland, and eventually the French, France.
Okay. Bohemia, Great Britain, Dutch Republic, Denmark.
Switzerland, and France. The Catholic League is made up primarily of German-speaking Catholics, I should say, led by Bavaria, the country that we would know as Bavaria. Spain. Spain has always kind of been predominantly historically Roman Catholic, and obviously the papacy. Italy, Rome. You got your two teams together and your roster? All German.
Oh, Germany.
I shouldn't say all German-speaking countries because the Dutch Republic is German-speaking, as is Bohemia. But German Catholics primarily, when you think of countries like Bavaria and Austria, things like that.
Catholic League is Spain, the papacy, Germany, and
Not Germany, German-speaking countries, because Germany doesn't formally exist yet, technically. I mean, it does, but it's not Germany like we know it. So be careful calling it Germany.
that's it. Just listed.
The German Catholics, led by Bavaria and other German-speaking countries, Spain, and the papacy. Now, what basically kicks all this off, besides the revocation, I mean, this is connecting to the revocation of the Letter of Majesty by Ferdinand II. Ferdinand, who is king of Bohemia, sends out messengers to try to work something out with the Protestants. Remember, he has revoked the Religious Toleration Act in Bohemia. But his messengers, when they show up to meet with the Protestants in Prague, they get in a little scuffle. The Roman Catholics get in a scuffle with the Protestants. I can't spell what it's called. Defenestration. There we go. Okay, so the Czechs, for example, the Czechs are Hussites. You guys remember talking about the Hussites previously in church history? John Huss. Okay, they're Protestants. They come from the John Huss lineage of the Reformation, early Reformation, pre-Reformation technically. So basically, the Roman Catholic messengers sent by the king are going to show up, and the first issue took. The first issue took place. The first time this kind of happened was back in 1419, but happens again in 1483. But then you have 1618. That's the one we're talking about. So this has happened more than once. Okay. So in 1618, the king of Bohemia sends these individuals 4 Catholic lords on May 23rd. Yeah, May 23rd, 1618. Count Yaroslav Borita of Martinez, Count, you don't have to write these down, I'm just telling you there. Count Willem Slavata of Slum, Adam II von Sternberg, and Matthew Leopold Popel Lakowitz arrived at the Bohemian Chancellery at 8:30 in the morning. They get together, all the Protestant leaders show up, and they get into a scuffle. And the Protestant leaders take the Roman Catholic lords, the 4 lords, and they chunk them out the window. See this? And this is not like chucking them out the window like right here.
I was like when they threw chains off the building for things like that.
Defenestration is a fancy word for throwing somebody out of a window. It was a 70-foot drop.
You live that.
That's 6 or 7 stories.
Probably not. Right.
Now, interestingly enough, the Roman Catholics survived. They survived, and they claimed, "Oh, the Blessed Holy Mother Virgin Mary has saved us," that she appeared to them and saved them from crashing. And the Protestants yelled out, "That's ridiculous. You landed in a pile of manure." How do you think Ferdinand's going to respond to this? He is not going to be happy. Ferdinand calls on Maximilian of Bavaria and the Catholic League to invade Bohemia. Sorry for the font being jacked up there. But it's called the Battle of White Mountain. So King Ferdinand calls on Maximilian of Bavaria and the Catholic League to invade Bohemia. And the Catholic League wins the battle. Holy Roman Ballpark. Catholics 1-0. Now let's talk about the Danish phase. Second inning, if you want to think of it this way. I realize baseball has 9 innings, so this is probably more like a basketball game with four quarters, I guess. But the second quarter, the Danish get involved. Okay, this is north of modern Germany, what we think of. Luther, king of Denmark, rules in some portions of the Holy Roman Empire. And so when you look at that map, Denmark is that northern part, north of the red line. Okay, north of modern Germany today. Notice this is all Germany, like right here. This is all Germany, but they're called different kingdoms back then. The Holy Roman Empire, okay? Different little small kingdoms underneath the Holy Roman Emperor. So, in the Danish phase, you have the Lutheran king of Denmark who invades the Holy Roman Empire to help protect the Protestants. So the Danish show up to help the Bohemians. The Danish are Lutherans, so are the Bohemians. You see where this is going? So, Bohemians, the king of Bohemia calls on some of his people. So it basically kind of starts out as a little bit of a civil war. But then the Lutheran Denmark army shows up to help the Protestants in Bohemia. That was too far. And they get defeated by a guy named Albert of Wallenstein, a mercenary who had been hired by the Catholic League to lead another little army. That's all you need to know. Just write down Albert of Wallenstein. Defeats the Danish, sends the Danish packing. So the Danish retreat and they go back to Denmark. But guess what? Wallenstein's not going to give up, and he chases them all the way back to Denmark and starts causing problems for them in Denmark. So now this little war has spread from Bohemia to Denmark.
How did it get all the way to Denmark? I'm sorry.
When the Roman Catholic king of Bohemia basically launches an attack against his own Protestant people who were Lutherans, the Denmark king is a Lutheran, and he hears of this and he sends his army to help them. All right, Michael. So, Roman Catholics, 2-0. But I think the score is more, the analogy is basketball, but the scoring system is more baseball or soccer, because, you know, they don't get very high up in points. Keep in mind, for the most part, this is a local war amongst within the Holy Roman Empire. It's still the Holy Roman Empire, even though it has kind of spread into the Denmark now. Phase 3, or the third quarter, if you will. Sweden decides to get involved. Notice where Sweden is on the map, which is kind of sort of covered up by my little thing up there. Right here. Sweden is directly east of Denmark. What religion do you think the Swedes are? Say it loud and proud.
Lutheran.
They're Lutheran. Gustavus Adolphus. If there's no other name you need to remember from this war, you need to remember this name. He's the king of Sweden. It's kind of cut off, I realize. Gustavus, Gustavus. Gustavus. Adolphus. He's the king of Sweden and he's Lutheran. A very famous picture of him riding a horse into the battle. And there's something interesting that you need to remember about him. He's basically the inventor of modern warfare. He's one of the very first people to use mobile artillery on the battlefield. So think cannons. Before this, artilleries are so big they can't move them really.
It's like they just assemble them and fire them around.
But now the cannons are starting to be a little bit more mobile. They're on wheels. They can push them and move them. So what he does in the Battle of Brightonfield, September 17th, 1631, Gustavus Adolphus is all the blue, so everybody in the north, and the red is the Roman Catholics. So Protestants, specifically the Swedish Protestants, versus the Roman Catholics. And so what he does is he lines them all up to meet in the battle. So over here you have the Swedish 2,400 numbers, Saxons about 18,000, I'll say 2,400, 24,000. And then Gustavus, you have another 42,000 in reserves in the back. And what he's going to do is he's going to kind of pull, he's going to pull his 18,000 back. The Roman Catholics are going to try to flank both sides. And all these little squares with the lines through them, those are cannons. So notice what he does. He moves them, pivots, and he causes the Roman Catholics to have to flee. He forces the majority of them to come from the east. He forces them to move. And then his forces flank them from the west, all using cannons. All right. So the Swedish are the ones that come in with their swords. They're the ones on the battlefield with the cannons. They're the ones that are going to defeat the Roman Catholic League. But if you're remembering, remember, we're in the Swedish phase. Okay? The Swedish swords, the Swedish are the ones fighting, but they're being funded by the French, which is interesting because they're Roman Catholic. They're not Protestants yet. What is going on? Why would the French support the Swedish, who are Lutheran, support the Danish and the Bohemians, who are all Lutherans? It all comes down to a concept called politique. Politique is a concept, something that was popularized by Henry IV, Henry Bourbon. Cardinal Richelieu is a French churchman, but he's also the first minister of France. And he's basically saying there are some more important things to worry about than the nuances of religion. he decides to put politics of his country over religion, over Roman Catholicism. And so the king is going to listen. Remember, the first minister of France, think prime minister, okay, is Roman Catholic cardinal. And he decided, I have to put my country over the Roman Catholic Church. And he does this for a very specific reason. He said political, and that's true. Think, you know, why is the Russian and the Ukrainian war such a big thing right now? Why does Russia want to invade? I've already told you one particular reason. It's true, which is part of what I'm getting ready to say. Everything in Europe, and this is actually true of the First World War, Second World War, Civil War, every war, when it comes to Europe, it's all about a balance of power. This is a concept that is, I know you guys are not historians necessarily. You maybe never studied European history at all. Any war in European history and even modern American history is about power, a balance of power. What is going to be our advantage? And how do we create a power so that no other European state can dominate the other? Why is everybody worried about the Ukrainian thing right now? The land grab. It's a cultural grab. I told you, like a religious cultural grab.
Trying to reestablish the USSR.
Not officially, but maybe unofficially, because Putin was a former KGB agent. Okay, there is financial stuff, financial resources. They want to shift the balance of power. Russia, NATO right now is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was created after World War II as a result, direct result of the Cold War, to keep Russia from invading other parts of Europe, to create an imbalance. Remember, that's what happened after World War II. That's what Hitler was trying to do. Hitler made an alliance with Russia, with Stalin, and Hitler betrayed him and tried to invade Russia. And Stalin responded. He joined the alliance with the Allies, and that's how we won the war. Was because Russia and America got involved. In Russia, we focused primarily on the Japanese and then the French front, and Russia went straight to Berlin and sacked Berlin. Russia immediately grabs up all of the regions that Germany had invaded. It was all about a balance of power. And that's what's taking place here. Remember, the House of Habsburg had a family member on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire from 1438 all the way until 1740. They are the most important royal house of Europe during these centuries, for basically 300 years. Following the 16th century, the 1500s, the dynasty becomes split between the Austrian and Spanish family members, Habsburg, okay? Their house is going to produce everything that I told you later. Remember I told you that World War II, all the kings came from one family? Their house produced kings of Switzerland, Bohemia, England, Germany, Hungary, Croatia, the Second Mexican Empire, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and smaller Dutch and Italian principalities. The French are surrounded by the Habsburg, and they want to balance that power. We can't let the Habsburg completely surround us. And France says the only way to fix that is to help the Bohemians and the Danish. So the French help the Swedes until Adolphus dies, when he leads a charge at Lutzen, defeating Wallenstein's mercenary army, although he himself was killed. This is a turning point in the war when the Swedish military involvement declines. However, before doing so, the Protestants, like I said, they defeat Wallenstein's army at the loss of their leader. So the Swedes, even though they win, they kind of decline after this. So now the Protestants have a point on the scoreboard. Finally, we get the last phase, the French. The French, remember, they want these other kingdoms, even though they're Roman Catholic, they want the other Roman Catholic kingdoms to lose, because they are the only ones that are not Habsburg. They don't want too much power surrounding them. So it's the largest, bloodiest, and most continental phase of this war. So now look at the map and how large we've expanded out. So now it kind of flips. Now the French are going to do the fighting, and the Swedish are going to provide the money. And this is the 4 phases of the 30 Years' War. Remember, the first 2 phases, Bohemian and Danish, is local and religious. The 3rd and 4th phase is more continental and political. They're trying to maintain the balance of power. When we come back on Wednesday, we will wrap this up. We'll wrap up the 30 Years' War and look at how the conclusion of the 30 Years' War really kind of alters the rest of history moving forward. Okay? If you haven't learned anything by this point about the last week or two, is that the European wars are all about the Protestants versus the Roman Catholics. All because people don't want to disagree. They're disagreeing over doctrine. And because doctrine becomes a cultural identity.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.